In the last 2 years, the education department of the Tate Gallery has mounted a holiday show called Kids Play, designed to introduce children to art and gallery going. This year, they've extended the scheme to something called Tate Games for adults as well. It's in a tent which you enter through a portico echoing the one on the main building beside it. Once through the portico, you go through a sequence of passages related in concept to Marcel Duchamp's last painting, Tumeux. Beyond this, in the tent itself, you come to a three-dimensional reproduction of Duchamp's two-dimensional work called Large Glass, or The Bride Stripped Bare by Her Bachelor's Eve, a series of machine-like forms, one of whose themes is sexual frustration. Nearby are two bicycles, which, if you pedal hard, make part of the machinery move. Various other amusement arcade-type games include a sort of pin table in which, by twiddling knobs, you can contribute to a random painting in the style of Jackson Pollock. There's a white bagatelle board on which silver balls make patterns determined by hidden magnets. This relates to Bernard Cohen's painting with 3 spots, 1 blue and 2 yellow, in the gallery itself. But there are no notices on display about the connections between particular games and particular works of art, because the organisers hope that adults and children will make their own connections. Well, I suppose this is the point on which the show succeeds or fails. This is, will children and adults make their own connection? Richard Core.
Well, I didn't see, frankly, the point of introducing adults to this kind of activity at all. I mean, I was a great admirer of the original Kids Play installation, which the Tate Education Department did 2 years ago, which I thought was tremendously successful. For one thing, they placed it right in the middle of the gallery, and I'll never forget the extraordinary experience of going to Kids Play and seeing a queue of children snaking past, after all very expensive turners, behaving not at all properly in a museum-style fashion, and having an absolute ball once they got inside. I mean, they were thoroughly enjoying themselves, and there were things there, there were full-blooded entertainments within the show, which they could really respond to. There was a very noisy noise room, for instance. There was a genuinely surprising little box which you looked into and everything was upside down. Things like that which made you gawk with astonishment and which were obviously aimed at 6-year-olds rather than us. And I think the fact that they were trying to do both these things with Tate Games gave the lie to the whole project. I didn't think it worked. I think it was too ambitious. It's a very clever thing to try and do, but I think it's almost impossible to bring it off.
Antonio Byatt.
I feel that it raised in my mind a paradox which I've never solved, which is that the more you talk about modern art being about the nature of the joke, and one of the organisers grabbed me when I had arrived there by the elbow, or more or less when I'd been there half a minute, and explained that it was all about Duchamp's concept of anti-art, the more you have to make earnest educational remarks at great length in order to persuade anybody to see what you're trying to do. I did in fact stay there an hour, and by going in and out of the Duchamp maze and by contemplating the brides and the bachelors, I got myself into a state of intellectual confusion which I felt was fruitful.
It wasn't repose.
No, it was not repose, nor was it a game, which is what I really had against it. My children dashed in and out of the maze and were prevented from walking on top of the Jackson Pollock and loved the dark and the light in the very simple-minded way. But I felt that it was not really for them. It was for me, and some of it was banal in the sense that I could have pulled the handle of a fruit machine which would have then produced a lot of critical cliches. And some of it was so complex that in a sense I would rather have gone and looked at the Duchamp, but not because they had told me to do so.
Roger Mandel.
Well, I think it's meant for adults, really, because after all, the whole concept of Dada in the 20s was to annoy you, to irritate you, to get you involved, so that you no longer saw paintings as something remote from you on a wall. You really got angry, you got involved in that sense. And here they turn so often the normal two-dimensional picture into a three-dimensional maze. You go through a succession of abstract experiences, you walk through that, eventually you go from light to dark. You end up in darkness, and then you emerge and you sort of feel your way through a kind of almost like a stage setting. I think there's something to this. I think this changes the nature of one's relationship to what is on the wall of a gallery. And this was really a Dada exhibition, and therefore I think more for adults in the long run than for children.
I think one of the things that might also change is the response of an audience to criticism they read. It's a very simple game. There's cliche machines. He's worked on the fruit machine principle, which is on, there are 3 revolving drums with 2 adjectives and a noun, and you work out your own sort of cliche. And I got acute sclerotic plagiarist. My favourite was when I suddenly looked down and noticed a small brown hand on the handle of the machine, and some small child sneaked between my legs and pulled the handle for me. And there in front of me was well-hung, meretricious pasticheur. Top that. Now I do think, these are sort of private eye jokes, and they're Suits corner jokes. At the same time, I think they may very well make people think twice about the criticism they read, and I think this is all to the good. Richard Cork, what do you think?
Yes, I would agree with you on that particular point, but I would say that, I mean, the whole basis of this show is art as game, isn't it, really?
Yes.
And I doubt myself whether the games were sufficiently game-like. I mean, for instance, one of the most active installations was the Paint Your Own Pollock machine, where you went up and you manipulated a series of handles and dripped the brush across a circular piece of paper until presumably it was so clotted with paper that they took it out and put another one in. Fine, but the whole point about that, really, is to get people involved in splashing around in the way presumably that Pollock did. How can you do that when you have this distanced, institutionalized perspex lid which prevents you from actually the remote possibility of becoming splashed by the paint? How can you do it without involving yourself in a much more vigorous degree than the educational side of an institution like the Tate allows you to? It also applied to the Mondrian, for instance. I mean, the Mondrian was really a painting turned into a climbing frame in an adventure playground. But how can you respond to a climbing frame without actually using it?
Well, surely there was a panel on which the kids could do their drawings, which I believe were cleaned up every evening, and you start drawing again the next day. But I rather like the Jackson Pollock thing. I mean, why shouldn't we all take part in an action painting? If action painting means throwing the paint around till eventually there is of all some kind of interesting spectacle of arrangement of black and white, okay, why shouldn't we all do this thing? Why should we leave it to Jackson Pollock?
But they can do it. I mean, kids can do that far more satisfactorily in an art class at school, can't they?
Kids
They can get
do
to the
it,
point
yes.
they splash it around.
You see, I wonder if we're all reacting rather so badly to the sinister brand of the education department, because one of the aims is to try and reflect with simply the way artists think, to try and, verbalise in a way what their intentions are, is to try and find new ways and to give people the opportunity to respond to art, as well as to try and discover a new audience.
And there were
for
those
art
clips.
galleries.
There were those clips of statements by a whole range of artists going right back to Picasso.
Oh, the aesthetic jukebox, where you press
2 minutes of statement by individual artists about what their intentions were, and you could press your button and get your artist.
The marvellous thing about that jukebox, Roger Manville, was that also if you pressed the right button, there was a choice of 350s pop records as well. You were very careful about it.
Curious enough, I mean, although there were many connections with the works of art that the Tate Gallery owned, I find there was a distancing effect from positioning the tent in the grounds. And I always remember the marvellous way in which the original Kids Play show was right in the middle of the gallery. And so you couldn't avoid actually seeing real works of art coming out. And with this one, you could easily just go into the tent as if almost it was part of a fun fair.
Yeah.
And then leave again and not even go up the steps and
Also,
approach the portico.
I did feel there was an inexorable intention to lead you into the gallery, which I felt would have been counterproductive with the age of child that you could have led in some other way, the sort of 10, 11, 12, which in fact it's perfectly easy to take in and just say, look at that, what do you make of it? But education has become such a kind of complex activity in our society now that I felt myself profoundly alarmed in some aesthetic way. I felt that they couldn't possibly have looked at, for instance, a Turner or a Jackson Pollock after that without being cluttered with lots of ideology.
Can I stress, by the way, that as a sufferer who limped up through the heat wave on Monday, that there is no Monday opening of this show, which I think the world should know about.